The Hansol mansion stood like a monument to wealth and power, surrounded by silent hills that seemed to guard the secrets of its grandeur. The large windows reflected the sunrise with an almost divine glow, and every detail, from the silk curtains to the marble sculptures, seemed carefully calculated to impress, as if beauty were also a way of concealing emptiness. Here, everything exuded order, discipline, and prestige, a meticulously rehearsed choreography to sustain the image of a perfect family. Kang Jun-ho's presence dominated the room. His footsteps echoed through the long corridors like a symphony of authority, reminding everyone that this empire had an owner. Always dressed in tailored suits, his gaze carried the weight of control and the coldness of someone who mistakes respect for fear. His words were measured, his gestures restrained, and even his discreet smile seemed part of a silent contract with his appearance. At the breakfast table, the Swiss clock marked the exact time of the routine, and silence became the primary language of that house. Yoon Soo-yeon, his wife, moved with the elegance of someone who learned to survive among porcelain. She dressed in white, spoke softly, and made the house an extension of the ideal image her husband projected. Every flower exchanged, every dish set on the table was a silent attempt to maintain the harmony that existed only outside. The love she felt no longer demanded return, only recognition. Her serene smile hid the loneliness of the nights when her husband arrived late and the empty look at dinners, where silence replaced tenderness. 6-year-old Min Jun was the only one who didn't yet understand the price of that perfection. She ran through the hallways with the naive joy of someone who believes love can exist without fear. She drew her family in vibrant colors, and in her scribbles there was always a shining sun, a sun that only existed in her dreams. When she waited for her father behind the curtains, she believed the sound of the door meant safety, unaware that what entered with that man was just another shadow. Outside, the neighbors called them an example, but inside the mansion, time began to whisper truths that luxury could not silence. There was something in the walls, in the restrained gestures, in the averted glances that foretold their downfall. Because all perfection is a sham with an expiration date. And when the first crack appears, will anyone still recognize what's left of love? Or just the echo of what they pretended to be? If this story has already piqued your curiosity, subscribe now and activate the bell to follow each revelation. Leave a like if you want to find out what really hides behind this perfect family. It all started with a glance, quick, discreet, but dangerous enough to change the fate of 3 lives. It was during a Hansol Group corporate event when Kang Jun-ho, surrounded by investors and cameras, locked eyes with Han Ji-min, a young, recently promoted marketing consultant. There was something about her that intrigued him, a mix of ambition and boldness masked by a restrained smile. She didn't look away when everyone else lowered their heads, and perhaps that was exactly what seduced him. That night, as the ballroom glowed with golden lights and crystal glasses, Jun-ho realized she was silently watching him, not like a boss, but like a man. Ji-min, for her part, knew how to play with the power of mystery. And as the clock struck the end of the party, she approached with a soft voice, saying she'd forgotten her tablet in the office. He offered to accompany her, little imagining that this simple gesture would open the door to the beginning of ruin. What began as an innocent encounter became a daily secret. At first, it was quick encounters, encrypted messages, and suppressed laughter in empty hallways. But over time, desire turned into addiction, and addiction into recklessness. Jimin discovered that Jun-ho wasn't just powerful, he was needy, lonely, and vulnerable, and like any intelligent woman, she learned to use this to her advantage. Jun-ho believed he could have everything without losing anything. He believed that control made him invincible. That's why, When Soo-yeon announced she was traveling with her son to visit her parents in Busan, he saw her absence as a perfect opportunity. He decided to do something unthinkable: bring Jimin into the house. He told her it would only be for a few days, until things calmed down. But inside that mansion, where every object held memories of a wedding, Jimin felt the bitter taste of luxury that didn't belong to her. She slept on silk sheets, but hid every time the doorbell rang. And even surrounded by wealth, her greatest fear was discovery, not by her wife, but by the innocent gaze of the boy who was drawing around the house. Jimin knew that children see what adults pretend not to, and the more she hid, the more the boy seemed to hear the sound of nighttime footsteps and the muffled whisper of unknown voices. Jun-ho believed he had control, but fate, as always, laughed at men who tried to hide the impossible. Because sometimes what you hide with your own hands is exactly what will lead to your downfall. The little one Min-jun, he had always been the kind of child who saw the world with watchful eyes, as if every shadow held a story. He spent his afternoons in the large makeshift studio next to the garden, where colorful sheets of paper spread out like wings. He liked to draw his father, his mother, the dog, and the enormous house that never seemed to sleep. But lately, something had changed. His drawings began to take on new shapes, strange forms his mother couldn't understand. Nameless faces, half-open doors, eyes watching from inside closets. It all began one night when the wind blew the curtains and Min-jun woke to slow footsteps in the hallway. He got up and looked through the crack in the door. His father was walking with a tray in his hands. Behind him, a feminine silhouette followed, wrapped in a red silk robe. The boy fell silent, confused. He thought it was a dream, but the next day, the scent of sweet perfume still lingered in the air. His mother, Yoon Soo-yeon, noticed her son's restlessness. She asked if he'd slept well, and he responded with only a shy smile and a new drawing. On the paper, a tall man held a tray, while a woman smiled beside him, half hidden behind a door. "Who's that, my love?" Soo-yeon asked, leaning in to see. "It's the aunt from the playroom," he replied innocently before running off to play. His mother laughed, thinking it was just a child's imagination, but something in his gaze made her hesitate for a moment. The following days brought a strange atmosphere to the house. Min-jun claimed to hear footsteps, whispers, and laughter when his father was working late. Once, he left a glass of milk at the guest room door and heard a woman's voice quietly thank him. When he told his mother, she merely smiled, but her heart raced. Children, after all, don't lie so convincingly. Meanwhile, Jun-ho tried to maintain his exemplary manly routine. He left early, came back late, pretending to attend endless meetings. But his son's eyes began to follow him differently. There was something in them he couldn't bear to look at for long, a purity that embarrassed him. At times, Jun-ho felt that Min-jun knew more than he let on, and then, on a rainy afternoon, the boy drew something new. A closet. 2 people inside, and a colorful phrase, "Shh, secret." When Soo-yeon saw this, her stomach lurched. She tried to laugh, but it wouldn't come. For the first time, her perfect home began to feel like an overly staged stage, and she, an actress who no longer remembered her role. But innocence, when it paints what it sees, turns the secret into truth, and the truth was about to be given a voice. The following days became a silent dance between deceit and convenience. Inside the Hanselte mansion, time seemed divided into 2 worlds. The impeccable surface, where Yoon Soo-yeon kept the house a picture of serenity, and the moral underground, where Kang Jun-ho lived his double life with the precision of someone calculating every breath. It was as if every wall held a secret and every light bulb lit only to illuminate guilt. During the day, Jun-ho continued his role as the exemplary father. He took his son to school, praised his drawings, kissed his wife on the forehead, and promised quiet dinners on the weekends. But when the clock struck 10 o'clock and the house fell silent, his steps led him to the guest room, where Jimin waited for him, wrapped in a silk robe, with the hungry gaze of someone longing to be seen. There, amidst expensive sheets and whispered vows, morality dissolved like the expensive perfume that lingered in the air. The mistress, however, was beginning to realize that the mansion's luxury had a bitter aftertaste. Living in hiding was turning her into a ghost, confined to the shadows, hearing laughter coming from the hallway and the distant echo of a child calling for its father. Jealousy gnawed at her, and with every touch Jun-ho gave, love mixed with anger. She wanted more than stolen moments. She wanted the life he'd promised, but for that to happen, someone would have to get out of the way. Soo-yeon, unsure of what she was breathing under the same roof, felt the distance grow. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and hear a muffled sound downstairs, footsteps, perhaps voices, a murmur that made her hold her breath. But she soon convinced herself it was just the wind rushing through the ancient windows. After all, in such a large house, silence could be deceiving. Meanwhile, little Min-jun became an invisible witness. Hiding behind doors, he watched his father open drawers, close curtains, and disappear into the dark hallway. The boy began drawing at night, by the light of a dim lamp, and each new line brought more than colors. It brought proof. The paper now became the mirror of what no one dared to say. Jun-ho believed everything was under control. But sin, when it becomes routine, takes root. And the roots grow until they crack the ground. He didn't know it, but every whisper exchanged in that room, every knowing look, and every lie told at the breakfast table were slowly building the stage for his own downfall. And it was in a simple colored drawing that destiny decided to expose what power tried to hide. That morning, the sun flooded the mansion's kitchen with a soft golden light, but the atmosphere felt strangely dense. Yoon Soo-yeon prepared coffee with automatic gestures, steam rising from the kettle and disappearing into the air. Her husband, as always, read the newspaper in silence, and Min-jun drew on the table, his pencils spread out like soldiers on the battlefield. He seemed intensely focused, his tongue between his lips and his gaze fixed, as if he were depicting something important. "Appa, look," he said, holding out the colored paper. Jun-ho looked up for a moment, saw the childish features and smiled absently. But Soo-yeon, as she approached, felt a shiver. In the drawing, the boy had painted a room with an open closet. Inside it, a man and a woman, smiling, together, hidden. Above the scene, in large, crooked letters, his son had written, "Daddy and Aunt playing silent." The air seemed to stop. Soo-yeon kept her smile, but her heart began to pound. "Who's that aunt, my love?" he asked sweetly, trying to hide his tension. "The one from the playroom," he replied matter-of-factly, coloring the sky blue. "She always tells me not to tell Mom." Her hands trembled slightly. The sound of the clock on the wall became unbearable, each tick a blow to her chest. For the next few minutes, everything continued as if nothing had happened. Jun-ho finished his coffee, kissed his son on the forehead, and hurried out, claiming a meeting. But Soo-yeon remained standing at the table, staring at the drawing. The colors, once innocent, now seemed to scream. The yellow of the room, the red of the dress, the brown of the door. Every detail was an unconscious confession. Instinct told her there was something real there. That night she returned to her son's room and found the stack of papers on his desk. There were other drawings. Some showed the same female figure, always smiling, always at her father's side. On one of them, a childish phrase. Scrawled in green crayon, "Auntie sleeps in Dad's room." Soo-yeon sat on the edge of the bed and remained silent. A tear fell, not of anger, but of disbelief. Love, she realized, can survive absence, but not lies. From that moment on, something inside her began to change. From a devoted wife, she became an observer, and what had once been faith in her husband transformed into silent vigilance. She didn't know it yet, but that drawing would be the first domino piece, the trigger for a truth that, when it fell, would drag everything down with it. And when a mother decides to truly look, even the blindest love learns to see what was hidden. That afternoon, the Hansol mansion seemed to breathe more slowly. The air was heavy, and the sound of wind coming through the open windows made the curtains move like restless ghosts. Yoon Soo-yeon, overcome by a strange sense of urgency, decided to clean the guest room, the one her husband, for some reason, insisted no one enter. He carried a rag in his hands, but deep down, he harbored a doubt that began to scream inside. The room was spotless, too spotless. Every object seemed freshly placed, as if someone had prepared the stage for inspection. The scent in the air wasn't the usual lavender scent used on linens. It was sweet, warm, and unmistakably feminine. Soo-yeon stopped. Her heart raced, and almost involuntarily, she ran her fingers along the dresser. There, she found a strand of long brown hair clinging to the edge of the drawer. A shiver ran down her spine. Her gaze was drawn to the large closet in the back. It was the same one from her son's drawing, the same childlike line that now seemed like an omen. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she took a deep breath and turned the handle. The sound of the hinges echoed like a metallic groan. Inside, there were neatly folded clothes, and, on a shelf, something that shouldn't have been there. A luxurious lipstick, a deep red used one. Beside it, a crystal goblet with the subtle imprint of lips. Time stood still. Soo-yeon held the object, and the scent of red wine mingled with the perfume that now filled the air. It was as if the room finally spoke. Every detail screamed a truth she didn't want to hear. Her breath became shaky, but there were no tears. There was something different about her now, something that wasn't pain, but clarity. He left the room silently. The sun was setting, and the mansion seemed to be plunged into a thick gloom. Love still existed, perhaps, but now it was shrouded in a shadow that would never lift. And when she decided to open the closet, she didn't imagine that, the next night, it would open up to her again. That night, the mansion's clock struck nearly midnight, when the silence became so thick it felt weightless. Outside, the rain fell furiously, washing the windows and blotting out the city's artificial glow. Yoon Soo-yeon sat on the living room sofa, pretending to read a book. Every sound in the house, the creaking of wood, the distant creaking of the floorboards, made her body shiver. She waited, as if awaiting a wordless confession. That's when he heard the footsteps. Steady, measured, almost rehearsed. Kang Jun-ho descended the stairs slowly, using only the light from his cell phone to illuminate the way. In his hands, he carried a tray covered in a linen cloth. Soo-yeon stood silently and followed him at a safe distance. Her heart beat like a muffled drum. Each step seemed louder than the last. He stopped in front of the guest room. He carefully turned the doorknob, entered and turned on the low light. Soo-yeon, hidden behind the half-open door, watched. And then the unthinkable happened. From inside the closet, the same one his son had drawn so many times, a woman emerged. Her hair loose, her face partially obscured by shadow, her body wrapped in a red silk robe. Han Ji-min smiled, took the tray, and kissed him with an intimacy that tore the air in two. Soo-yeon felt her stomach churn, but she didn't make a sound. She took her phone from her pocket and began recording, her hands steady, as if she were facing a play she needed to record herself to prove she wasn't crazy. The betrayal now wasn't a question. It was a living, breathing, almost grotesque scene, taking place within the home she had nurtured with love and ingenuity. Jimin leaned her head on Jun-ho's shoulder and chuckled softly, asking him to promise to put an end to this perfect wife act. And he, without hesitation, replied, "Soon, my love, soon." In that instant, Soo-yeon realized that the man who had been sleeping beside her for years had never really existed, only a mask. She backed away slowly, her eyes watering, her body cold. She climbed the stairs in silence, breathing deeply to keep from collapsing. When she entered her own room, the mirror above her dressing table reflected a woman she almost didn't recognize. There was no purity in her gaze, only purpose. Soo-yeon didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't confront. She just whispered to herself, "They still don't understand who they're dealing with." And while her husband slept peacefully beside the lie, she began to write the script for revenge, word for word. The next morning, the sun rose dully over Seoul. Inside the Hansol mansion, breakfast was served as usual. The table was spotless, the cutlery clinked softly, the son smiling between his parents. But something invisible had changed. Yoon Soo-yeon was no longer the woman who endured in silence. Behind her serene gaze, a plan was beginning to take shape, cold, meticulous and patient, like ice that melts slowly but inevitably cuts. As Jun-ho talked about contracts and meetings, she watched. Every gesture, every pause, every word spoken naturally fueled a quiet flame within her. The same man who lied so elegantly would now be the victim of his own act. As soon as he left for work, Soo-yeon grabbed her phone, reviewed the video recorded the night before, and saved copies on multiple devices. The betrayal, previously invisible, was now evident. In the days that followed, she became the perfect actress. She cooked dinner, smiled at her husband, laughed at his jokes. The man, blinded by his own vanity, believed everything was under control. But while he slept peacefully, Soo-yeon exchanged messages with a trusted lawyer and gathered information about the company's finances. Every detail counted: properties, hidden accounts, holdings. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about liberation. Jimin, the lover, began to lose her patience. Living in hiding was turning her into a shadow, and shadows cannot bear oblivion. One tense night, she demanded that Jun-ho leave his wife immediately. "You promised me the world," she whispered, her tears like poison. "And now, what am I left with?" Jun-ho calmed her, promising a future he himself no longer believed in. He said, everything was under control, unaware that this time he was the one being watched. Soo-yeon saw everything, heard everything. Cameras discreetly installed in the hallway captured every movement, every encounter, every word whispered in the darkness. What had once been home was now the scene of a trap. She knew revenge didn't require haste, only precision. That week he invited close friends and investors to a family dinner. She said she wanted to celebrate the new phase of her husband's life. Flattered, Jun-ho accepted without hesitation. And while he toasted to success, Soo-yeon toasted the beginning of the end. Because revenge, when born from silence, is the most lethal of all. And at the dinner that seemed like a celebration, each glass raised would be the harbinger of the fall of an empire. The evening arrived with deceptive elegance. The lights of the Hansol mansion bathed the halls in a warm glow, and the aroma of dinner wafted through the hallways as if nothing could disturb that harmony. The table was impeccable, glasses lined, white and gold flowers, the three-tiered. Cake in the center, a symbol of celebration. Jun-ho himself looked proud, the perfect husband, the exemplary host, the man who had regained control of everything. Little did he know that night, control would be ripped from his hands. Soo-yeon, dressed in an elegant ivory-hued hanbok, descended the stairs with the serenity of someone who already knew the end of the story. Her eyes didn't tremble, her voice didn't waver. She greeted the guests with subtle smiles and kind words, but inside, Silent countdown echoed, tick-tock, tick-tock, until the truth would be served with dessert. Min Jun, innocent and radiant, played with crayons in the corner of the room. His father watched him proudly and, for a moment, believed everything was fine. His mistress, Han Jimin, was also there, disguised among the staff, pretending to be a newly hired assistant. Jun-ho had brought her closer once more, thinking he had mastered the danger, unaware that she too was a pawn in the trap his wife had set. During dinner, the mood was light. Laughter, toasts and compliments on the food. Soo-yeon, sitting at the head of the table, seemed genuinely happy. She spoke sweetly, looked at her husband with practiced tenderness, and praised his dedication to the family. Her every word, however, was a sheet of honey, until, in a seemingly innocent gesture, she called to her son, "Min-jun, dear, show the guests that new drawing of yours, the prettiest one." The boy ran excitedly, carrying a large sheet of paper. Everyone smiled until they saw the contents. On the paper were his father, mother, and a woman in a red dress, together in the same house. And right above, in colorful, childlike writing, was a sentence, "Now everyone lives here." The laughter died down. The sound of silverware fell like a metallic echo. Soo-yeon looked at her husband and smiled gently. "Cute, isn't it?" she said. "Children always tell the truth, even when they draw." Jun-ho swallowed, his face paling. Jimin, in the background, took a step back, his eyes panicked. The guests looked at each other uncomfortably. Soo-yeon then took her phone out of her bag, opened the video, and placed it on the table. The sound of the guest room, the whisper of promises, the forbidden kiss, it all echoed through the room as if sin itself had been invited to dinner. Jun-ho tried to stand, but his wife stopped him with a firm look. "Sit down," she said calmly. "You always like to control everything. Today, I just learned from you." He fell silent. His humiliated lover left the room, her face streaming with tears. The investors withdrew one by one, murmuring among themselves. The Han-Seoul Empire was beginning to crumble, and what had been a celebration turned into a wake for pride. Soo-yeon picked up her son and carried him to the bedroom, while her husband remained motionless, alone before the wreckage of his own lie. But hell doesn't end when the truth comes out. It begins when you have to live with it. The scandal spread through Seoul like wildfire. The next day, the name Kang Jun-ho printed the headlines, Han-Seoul Group CEO involved in marital scandal inside his own home. Images of the dinner, discreetly captured by one of the guests, circulated on social media, transforming the most respected figure in the corporate elite into a national object of ridicule. Within hours, contracts were suspended, partnerships were severed, and investors disappeared, as if they had sensed the storm long ago. Inside the company, the mood was one of collapse. Employees avoided mentioning his name as if it had become a harbinger of doom. Han-Seoul's shares plummeted, and the meeting room that once echoed with applause now held only silence and shame. Han Jimin, his lover, disappeared without a trace, taking with her empty promises and the perfume that still haunted the mansion's hallways. Jun-ho tried to rally, but each attempt was stifled by the weight of his own pride. Crisis interviews were cancelled. No one wanted to hear the justifications of a man who built his fortune on lies. Soo-yeon, on the other hand, remained silent. There was no need for revenge when the world itself was in charge of carrying it out. As the days passed, the empire crumbled stone by stone. The luxury car was sold, the penthouse in Gangnam traded for a smaller apartment, and for the first time, the man who dictated the fate of hundreds of people discovered what it was like to be ignored. In his eyes, only emptiness remained, the same emptiness he had once tried to fill with a body that wasn't that of the woman who loved him. The night he signed his resignation, Jun-ho returned home to find the family portrait on the floor, the shattered glass reflecting his broken image. He knelt and wept, not out of regret, but over the loss of power, the only thing he truly cherished. But the cruelest punishment had not yet arrived, because sometimes destiny prefers to destroy slowly until the guilty party hears themselves in their own silence. The Hansol mansion, once a symbol of power, was now a cold, empty shadow. The wind blew through the hallways, making the doors slam shut as if the house itself breathed guilt. The walls, once covered with portraits and awards, reflected only the echo of a man in ruins. Kang Jun-ho, he lived there alone, surrounded by ghosts who had names, scents, and memories. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper what he'd tried to hide, and now there was no one left to pretend not to hear. The nights grew long. He wandered the rooms in silence, stumbling over memories like someone stepping on shards of glass. In the old dining room, he saw the reflection of his son laughing, his wife serving tea, the life he had destroyed with his own hands. The antique clock still ticked mercilessly, reminding him that time never fades, he repeats. And the sound of its ticking was the only dialogue he had left. One day, when he opened one of the drawers in his office, he found the latest drawing of Min Junit was simple yet cruel. A house split in half, a small man on one side, the boy and his mother on the other. Above them, the sun wept blue tears. Jun-ho stared at the paper for endless minutes, and then the nervous laughter escaped his throat, turning into a choked sob. That drawing, more than any headline, was his final judgment. He tried to call Soo-yeon, but she didn't answer. He tried to visit his son, but was prevented from doing so. And for the first time, the man who had always had access to everything discovered what it was like to be forgotten. Silence was now his punishment. And within him, the memory of his son's voice, sweet and innocent, saying, "Auntie lives in the closet." That night, sitting on the floor of his darkened room, Jun-ho opened the same closet where it all began. Inside, only the echo of his own breathing. No lover, no secrets, just emptiness. And as the lights flickered in the force of the wind, he realized that, in the end, the worst kind of prison is the one you build within yourself. But fate, implacable, still had one last act in store, not of pain, but of redemption. Months had passed since the scandal that destroyed the Hansel Empire, and with it, all the illusions Yoon Soo-yeon had once harbored. Winter, with its biting cold and grey days, had given way to a delicate, almost timid spring, which seemed to emerge silently, as if asking permission to bloom. On the streets of Busan, cherry trees were beginning to open their pink petals, and the light scent of the blossoms mingled with the sea breeze. It was as if nature, in its patient wisdom, wanted to remind everyone that nothing, no matter how devastating, can prevent life from beginning anew. Soo-yeon walked slowly along the shore, hand in hand with Min-jun, who now smiled with a lightness she hadn't seen in a long time. The boy was growing healthy, curious, and attentive to the world. His eyes, once marked by confusion and fear, now reflected the pure brightness of childhood regained. His laughter echoed through the air like small melodies, breaking the silence that had dominated their lives for so long. The sound of her son's laughter was the most sincere reminder that pain, no matter how deep, can give rise to peace. With each step, Soo-yeon felt the weight of the past fall behind her. There were scars, true, but they no longer hurt her. They simply told the story of a woman who survived. Her features still held melancholy, but also a new serenity, gained with time, with tears, and with forgiveness. A forgiveness that wasn't reconciliation, but liberation. She had learned, with each loss and each mistake, that forgiveness isn't about going back, but about choosing to move forward, without letting bitterness poison the future. The new house was simple, with white walls and wide windows that let the sun in unobstructed. Mornings were filled with the sound of birds and the aroma of fresh coffee, and afternoons with the sound of waves crashing in from the ocean. On the living room walls, Soo-yeon hung Min-jun's drawings. They were different from the old ones. There were no shadows or closed doors. There were bright colors, blue skies, houses with open windows, and smiling people. On each piece of paper, the boy expressed the freedom he was finally beginning to feel. One of the drawings showed a woman and a boy walking hand in the sunshine. In the corner, Min-jun had written, "Now the day doesn't end early." Soo-yeon looked at that sentence and smiled, understanding that her son wasn't just drawing, he was healing himself. While mother and son rebuilt their lives, Kang Jun-ho wandered through a completely different world. The man who had once been the symbol of perfection and power now lived isolated in a modest penthouse, with no assistants, no meetings, no public. Silence was the only sound that accompanied him. The nights were long, and the echo of his own footsteps had become an uncomfortable reminder of all he had lost. There were no more Swiss watches, imported cars, or gala dinners. Only the ghosts remained, the memories of an empire built on vanity and destroyed by pride. One morning, upon opening the closet where he had once hidden his secrets, Jun-ho found something unexpected. Taped to the wood was a small, old, childish drawing, yellowed with age. It was the same one that had once shamed him, the same one that had made him lose his mind before the exposed truth. The drawing showed a man, a woman and a boy holding hands, but the father's face was blurred, as if the artist had given up on finishing it. Below, in shaky, colorful letters, was written the phrase, "Appa lied." The drawing didn't. Jun-ho stood still for long minutes, staring at that piece of paper as if it were a mirror. His heart, previously shielded by pride, finally surrendered. He understood that that drawing, made by small, pure hands, was the portrait of his true failure. For the first time, he didn't try to justify his actions or blame fate. He simply felt, and in that feeling, something inside him began to dissolve, the weight of guilt, the vanity, the belief that love could be bought. The man who had sought so much control finally realized that the true punishment wasn't losing power, but understanding, too late, the value of what he had once had and destroyed. Outside, the world continued on. Soo-yeon and Min-jun lived a simple daily life, made up of small gestures that once seemed trivial, making breakfast together, reading bedtime stories, talking about what the future might hold. Sometimes, Soo-yeon still dreamed of the past. Some nights, Jun-ho's face would appear among the fragments of memory, not as a villain, but as someone lost, trying to overcome their own emptiness. At those times, she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and wished that wherever he was, she had found the peace that had always eluded her. One spring afternoon, Soo-yeon and Min-jun walked to the sea. The sun was sinking below the horizon, tinting the waters gold and purple. The boy ran across the wet sand, leaving small footprints that the tide soon erased. In his hands, he carried a new drawing, which he waved joyfully in the wind. The paper depicted a calm sea, a clear sky, and in the background, 3 figures holding hands. As Soo-yeon approached, she noticed that her father's face was finally drawn, not perfectly but peacefully. She smiled, feeling a tear fall, not of sadness, but of gratitude. The wind blew, lifting her hair, and the sound of the waves mingled with the soft voice of the narrator that concluded the story. Secrets hide in the shadows, but love always finds the light. The camera slowly pulled back, revealing the vast sea and the horizon that seemed to promise new beginnings. Life was moving on, and the cycle was complete. The past had served its purpose, and karma, patient, fair, and inevitable, had finally found its balance. And so, love once wounded became a memory, and the memory a lesson. Because some endings aren't punishments, they're new beginnings in disguise. If this story touched you, subscribe now and follow the next stories that transform pain into hope. Like, share, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe love can truly be reborn after ruin?